often disappointing.
I hear some people complaining about how they ruined Katara's character, how they ruined Sokka, or messed up this storyline or that. But you know what they really ruined from the original show? Netflix's live-action remake of Avatar: The Last Airbender is everything I feared it would be. I've seen people say all sorts of things about this show. Some people like it, some people don't. Some people have found a nice middle ground saying, you know what, it's not great, but it respects the original show. Me personally, I find that to be ridiculous. If anything, my first guess after watching the show would be that they have no respect for the original. And to be frank, I really don't like it. Well, why don't you like it? Well, okay, that's a good question, right? But, alright, let me ask you this. What is it that you don't like about the Shyamalan version? Right? Okay. Everything you just listed? That's why. Let's look at a couple reasons as to why the Shyamalan version doesn't work. Oh, okay, yeah, this show doesn't have that problem. It gets a pass on that one. But you know what? On that note, I'm not gonna talk about the cast. They're alright. My issues with this show lie solely with the creative team and its direction. With a better script and direction, this cast might have done a lot better. Sure, the performances are wooden and they lack chemistry, but rarely do you ever see a good project that just so happens to have bad performances in it. Usually, it just comes along with the bad script and everything else. Matter of fact, if you just took the original script from the animated show and had Bright direct it, this same exact cast could have done leagues better than what they did in this show. But alas, we live in this universe where Bright, the creators of the original animated show, left the Netflix show. That's one of the biggest red flags you could possibly have about a show. The fact that the original creators of a property distinctly said, hey, whatever this is, it's not our show. They literally told us, this is not Avatar, and yet everyone's completely forgotten about it. Anyways, so back to what I was saying. What issues did we have about the Shyamalan version that made us hate it so much? Poorly written dialogue? Check. Bad CGI? Check. Missing the point of the original show?
You found a master, haven't you?
Yes. You're looking at her.
Big fat check. I'm telling you guys, the dialogue in this show is on par with the Star Wars prequels. Don't lie to yourself, you know it's true. After all, what's Hollywood better at than taking something that's fun and colorful from our childhood and turning it into something that's drab, gray, and depressing? Have people nowadays not heard of contrast and juxtaposition? You're supposed to contrast the more serious moments with some fun moments so that they have more weight to them. You need to feel for the characters in order to care about what's going on. Instead, everyone's just sad all the time. Even when he has fun, it's got this dour undertone like on Kyoshi's Island when Aang is playing with the kids and the lady's like, this kid's dangerous, he's a threat, he needs to get out of here. While I'm on the subject of Kyoshi's Island, let's talk about that episode. Now, let me make something very clear. Just because something is changed doesn't mean it's bad. People were up in arms about Sokka not being sexist in this show, but if that were it, I feel like people could move past it. I mean, sure, that was a big thing for Sokka in the original. It was a big part of his character, but it wasn't like that was his entire character. If that were the biggest and worst change that they had made to this show, I'm sure that people could have forgiven it. But little did we know, when it comes to changes for the worse, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Changing one thing is, well, one thing, but when you change Sokka, and also Suki takes off her makeup, and also Aang talks to Kyoshi first, and also Kyoshi possesses Aang first instead of Roku, and also, you see what I mean? These things add up to where it's not even recognizable as Avatar anymore. If they were good changes, then it'd be different, but instead, they've changed everything for the worse. For instance, what I was just talking about. The lady in charge of Kyoshi's Island was saying Aang would bring destruction to their village. She was so apprehensive to let him stay and urged them to leave. And yet, when the destruction actually comes, like she said it would, then all of a sudden she's like, you've brought hope to us, Avatar? Like, what the f***? So, you were saying Aang shouldn't stay because he'll bring death and destruction to your village? But then when you're proven right, now you're on board with the whole Avatar thing? Please make it make sense. This is a prime example of a change for the worse. They changed the fact that Aang and his friends were welcomed onto Kyoshi Island because he's the Avatar. And another thing, how and why does Kyoshi possess Aang before Roku does? In the original show, Aang could only talk to Roku in a very specific place at a very specific time. The stakes were incredibly high because if he missed that window, he may never be able to talk to Roku again. And yet, in this show, I guess it's just something he can do right off the bat with no training? I know there's a big Kyoshi fetish going on right now, but give me a break. And yeah, he eventually talks to Roku later on, but that's not the point.
It's good to see you, Aang. What took you so long?
Who dares disturb the peace of the Avatar?
It's me, Aang.
Is it not customary to bow before your elders? And to avert your eyes? And hop on one leg? Forgive me, I couldn't resist. It's good to see you, Aang. But what took you so long?
The point is, because they were unable to hold in their nut for Kyoshi, they've diminished the importance of Aang talking to Roku later in the show. In an attempt to make it different, they've instead made it less logical. That's a recurring theme with almost every single change they've made to this version of the show. In its attempt to simplify the story, they ended up making things more complicated. Also, if you're going to try and ham-fistedly condense Avatar: The Last Airbender, then why would you include Azula and the Fire Lord? Azula and the Fire Lord, hell, the entire Fire Nation, is only ever hinted at and alluded to throughout Book 1. They build up the idea of the evil Fire Nation more so than the actual people running it, so that their presence is felt as a looming threat more so than an immediate one. But my point is, can you imagine what they could have done with all the time and the resources they dedicated to characters who aren't even supposed to be there yet? Like really, you just had to show Mei and Ty Lee, but you skipped Haru? A character with one of the most significant moments in Book 1? I'm not saying you had to include him. In fact, he's one of the few characters I felt you could exclude if you wanted to. But if you're excluding him, a character who was actually in Book 1, then why would you include characters that aren't even supposed to be there and don't have any input on the story thus far? You could have used those resources to flesh out the main trio or have more action or do something, anything that would have improved this goddamn piece of I'm gonna take a moment here to talk about what I think set a pretty good standard for live action adaptations. And that would be HBO's The Last of Us. HBO's The Last of Us is not a one-to-one remake of the game it's based on. In fact, they took many liberties in what they included and excluded from that game. However, the original story still stayed intact. I'd say the HBO version is about 85 to 90% accurate to the original. It's true to the characters, the tone, the plot, while making changes here and there to fit into 9 episodes. Not all of the changes they made were great. However, they revolved around things that were insignificant enough to not taint the message of the original story. Oh, and by the way, they had one of the original directors of the game, Neil Druckmann, on board the entire time. See the difference? If Neil Druckmann had packed it up and said, you know what, this isn't something I want to be a part of, I don't think it's a good representation of The Last of Us, then clearly, whatever it is not a good representation of The Last of Us. But you know the biggest thing I take away from HBO's Last of Us? Is that I was glad that they made that show. You want to know why? Because I love The Last of Us. I love the story and the characters and the moments in that game. But I want more people to experience that story than is possible with just a video game. Not everybody plays video games. I can't get my dad to play the video game. I can't get him to watch me play the game. I can't get him to watch the cutscenes on YouTube. but I can get him to watch an HBO show, and when that show closely resembles the story that I fell in love with, then it's a win-win scenario. I'm happy that the source material is well represented on the screen, and I'm happy that I get to now share that with someone who otherwise wouldn't have experienced it beforehand. After watching Netflix's Avatar, I went back and watched the original in order to make myself feel better. And what I realized was that it takes 20 minutes to watch an episode of the original animated show. That's less than half of the time it takes to watch one episode of the Netflix version. And yet, I get more story beats, more excitement, more character development out of the animation than the live action. Not to mention, it's almost certainly a fraction of the cost. Nothing about this Netflix version of the show made me say, you know what? I'm glad they made this. They really needed to make this live action adaptation. As I mentioned earlier with The Last of Us, I was glad that I could show other people the story now and they'd get the gist of it. It's close enough, true enough to the characters, and the ending still hits because they built and laid the foundation the way they were supposed to, as was done in the source material. But with this, I'm not happy to show this to my friends and family because it's not the story that I fell in love with. It's too different in the wrong ways. It's not Avatar. It's a watered down, mangled, half-baked version of Avatar. And that's everything that I feared it would be. Anyways, that's enough out of me. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Let me know in the comments if you want to see more videos like this. And if you guys have any suggestions, let me know what you want to hear me talk about. And as always...